Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have you here. We will start our webinar with a short video from Invest in Africa, and thereafter we will have the official opening remarks from the representative of Invest in Africa in Kenya. Those are the hashtags as well as the logos for our media from our different partners for this webinar today. The first part of our webinar is a 20-minute discourse that will bring forth the rationale and the background for this webinar. And thereafter, we will have the privilege of listening to two of our speakers who will be helping us to navigate the topic through their different lenses based on their extensive and rich experience. Thereafter, of course, we will have the 25 minutes forum, which is the participants forum for you, our distinguished panel, where you will have the opportunities to seek clarity through asking questions to our different speakers. And then the last part of our webinar, of course, will be the closing segment that will be moved by Invest in Africa Kenya. Without further ado, I kindly request Team IIA to screen our video. Thank you very much.
My name is Bernadette Kanja of Regiment of Hospital Suppliers. I'm the Managing Director. Our job involves making uniforms for the staff. So what the company went through during the COVID-19 is that we lost so many clients. There were some that we had done some work for, but now it became difficult for them to pay us. We have other clients who had to cancel orders because we had requested them to pay us some down payments, and that was too difficult for them. So after joining Invest in Africa, I've learned a bit of skills as to how to manage the business and also to manage finances. One of the biggest achievements I've had from them is the coaching. I went through the coaching process, and now I realized so many things that I wasn't doing very well. I realized the areas I could put more effort, especially in doing marketing. So I've talked to my team, and we have started doing aggressive marketing. We've gone back to our old clients who left maybe a year or 2 years ago. We've talked to them, and there is some hope that they'll be back. So through the aggressive marketing, I foresee us moving very far, not just to break even, but even to move to the highest level that we can. Because once we have a lot of clients coming every now and then, it will mean our work will be continuous, and when one client is unable to pay in good time, the other one will pay, and we'll keep moving on as we wait for everything to go back to where we were or even get better.
Thank you very much, Team IIA, for the video. Without further ado, I would like to invite the ICT Global Lead for Invest in Africa Kenya, Mr. David Ajowi, for the opening remarks. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Mudoni, and greetings, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone. A very warm welcome to today's webinar on legal frameworks as incubators for disaster management. Today's session is hosted or brought to you by Invest in Africa, together with our partners, the Strathmore Business School and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. As you've heard, my name is David Ajowi. I'm the Global ICT Lead at Regiment in Africa, and I'll be giving these opening remarks on behalf of our country manager, Ms. Terry Kinywa. Now, Invest in Africa is a private sector-led partnership initiative that's committed to supporting the growth of and development of the micro and small enterprises. We do this through improving their access to skills, markets, and finance. And we also do recognize the vital position that these micro SMEs play in driving African economies. And therefore, we are very dedicated to ensuring that their sustainability and their survival is guaranteed. Now, research has shown that these micro SMEs do contribute actually up to almost 80% of jobs across our great continent. And in sub-Saharan Africa, there are about 44 million of these micro and small SMEs. In Kenya, MSMEs employ over 15 million people, and they do contribute about 30% to the national GDP. Disasters do strike, just like the COVID-19, and when they do, their impacts erode years of development and gains that some of these businesses have made. As such, the micro SMEs need to be equipped with the tools for them to prepare, to mitigate, respond, recover from these disasters and their impacts. Safeguarding these small businesses translates to safeguarding the communities, as they do play a very crucial role in economic development. IIA Invest in Africa, through its program, the MSME Resilience Building Initiative, and the robust legal frameworks in addressing the ability of these SMEs to withstand and prepare for, mitigate, respond, and build back better from disasters has come to the fore. We've run a series of programs through this program. This webinar today will explore the different legal frameworks around disaster management in Kenya, with the aim of improving and strengthening these frameworks. We do very look forward to an engaging discussion with you, with our panelists, with our speakers, that then will lead to development of stronger legal frameworks and improving the existing ones already in disaster management, and to ensure that these MSMEs then can be able to, withstand disasters when they strike. I do once again welcome you all and look forward to an engaging discussion. Feel very much welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for the opening remarks. Linking legal frameworks to the creation and management of disasters. And we will start our discussion, our discourse really about linking legal frameworks, the creation and management of disasters. Allow me to introduce and welcome my fellow contributors for this segment of the webinar. I have with me Dr. Jock Marumba, who is an assistant professor, emergency management and disaster science at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She is also faculty in the Disaster Management Executive Program at the Strathmore University Business School. Also with me in this segment is Ms. Wangashi, who is Advisory Non-Executive Director, Invest in Africa, Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, the disaster management discourse is not an end to a process, but rather an ongoing process. We know that the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, extreme weather patterns, a volatile global security, to name just a few, has resulted in action and discussions about the topic of managing risks, and more specifically, to SMEs managing emerging risks for businesses. Invest in Africa and its multi-sectoral partners through the IIA Dialogue series initiated steps towards building the resilience of MSMEs. However, we do appreciate that without the required legal instruments, efforts to understand disaster risk, invest in disaster risk for resilience, or even preparedness to build back better will remain ad hoc, siloed, and not mainstreamed into the development agenda. And today, fellow participants, we want to advocate for action towards positioning legal frameworks as incubators for disaster management. That's the advocacy that will result in drafting of bills, environmental policies, etc., that will draw in and benefit from a multi-stakeholder multi-sectorial partnership approach. So positioning of required legal instruments for disaster management guarantees the assignment of clear roles and tasks within disaster management institutions, processes, and decision making. It also affords for clear accountability frameworks and the realistic allocation of resources. So really, ours is really a call. It's a call to make certain that outcomes from processes such as the one that was driven by IIA and its partners inform decision making and really contribute to efforts in securing and building the resilience of our lives and livelihoods. So that is really the gist of it. It's to make sure that we have action towards building resilience, making sure that we secure our lives and livelihoods through having the appropriate legal instruments. I will stop there and move on to our next contributor, Dr. Njoki, whom I would really like to start with a question about why do we say creation of disasters? Dr. Njoki, over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Muthoni, and I would also want to acknowledge IIA and also acknowledge our different partners, including my university, the University of Nebraska in Omaha, as well as Strathmore, with whom I do partner. And to start us off, I would like to just briefly introduce myself. That yes, my name is Jocky Marumba, and my area of specialty is actually in studying and understanding disasters, not just from a phenomenon perspective, but also understanding how people across the board and organizations or interact, right, with disasters. It is not a very commonly understood field. So please do not, don't feel one way or another that you might not quite fully have heard about this field. And it is often mistaken when we talk about the work that we do. People often mistake it for specifically disaster responders, meaning your first aid type of people, your emergency response, the people who are responsible for the ambulances, the people who are actually during an incident involved in managing that event as it happens. That is a very important aspect. That is a very important role that emergency managers play. But that is just the visible component of the work that we do in my field, which I interchangeably refer to as disaster management or emergency management. It is only a slice of the work that we do. And we often refer to that work that we do in responding to disasters. It's situated in the response phase. There are 4 phases to disasters, but we also refer to it as the work that we do when the skies are gray sky work. So we have a lot of blue skies, right, where we work to actually prepare and individually, but collectively as well, trying to prepare the individuals and trying to prepare organizations, countries, regions in anticipation of disasters. Please note, I did not say if. It's always a matter of in anticipation, because there are people working, different people in multiple disciplines working in the background, trying to understand what the current and the future looks like in the landscape of disasters. So when it comes to disasters, it's not a matter of whether they will happen, it's a guarantee that they will happen. It's also a guarantee that as based on research, that we will continue to see an increase not only in the frequency of disasters, but we will also continue to see an increase in the intensity of the kind of disasters that we have, and disasters are going to continue to overlap one after another and compound together, just as we are experiencing right now. And what I would like to do right now is go ahead and share my screen.
Okay, so we will wait for Dr. Njoki to start sharing her screen, and I will take that opportunity to bring in Wangashi Morioki to tell us, Wangashi, legal frameworks are unequivocally necessary for MSMEs. The upcoming general elections are just one component, but a key risk factor for business and investors in Kenya. Could you shed a perspective on why legal frameworks could be more important now more than ever to MSMEs? Over to you, Wangashi.
All right. Thank you very much, Muthoni, for the opportunity, and to the Invest in Africa team, to the partners, Strathmore and University of Nebraska, and all the guests that are joining, together with the speakers. Good afternoon and good morning. So my name is Wangashi, and I will very, very briefly share my thoughts and my views on why legal frameworks are really important for us as a country. And just to reiterate David's opening remarks, he has mentioned to us about the impact that micro, small and medium enterprises have on this country, that currently we have in Kenya over 7 million of these organizations, which make up more than 90% of all farms in Kenya, employing 50 million people and contributing to over 30% of our GDP. This means that they are significant. Now we are in an election year, and we are looking at 4 months to an election. So why is this important? Why is this a concern right now? So first and foremost, this year is special because concerns over the election are much more profoundly felt than usual. Normally, we think about elections and we are overly consumed with who will win, who will not win, what will be the policies. But the reality on the ground is that we are operating in an economy that is convalescing. We are like a patient that is just recovering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are all aware of the resulting impacts. Now, MSMEs in Kenya for sure have demonstrated some levels of resilience as they emerged from the ravages of COVID-19 pandemic. We've had very good success stories. We've also just had a testimonial from one of the SMEs that some of them have been able to pivot, and there are still others that are struggling and are trying to cope with these impacts. Now, as the country gears up for an election, MSMEs are still finding themselves in a precarious spot, given that the politics or the elections come with significant threats, or rather political risk, which could propel them either forwards or send them to oblivion. And these risks comprise a lattice of interconnected issues. Some of them have had far-reaching effects on MSMEs in a myriad of ways. Now, this is so important at this point because as we think about the risks of elections, quite often, even the government does not think about MSMEs. And we all know that some of the common knock-on impacts historically have been delays in hiring, reducing capital expenditures. Previously, we have experienced the closure of factories, we have had cancellation of orders, or even the collapse of the stock market. This has happened before, and in effect, we see long-term foreign investments delayed. Kenya is a significant country because most of the landlocked countries in East and Central Africa depend on Kenya for their supplies. And all this is work that MSMEs are doing in this country. Now, as we think about the elections and reflect about what could potentially happen or the risk, we are also dealing with the economic impacts of the war in Ukraine. Well, you may wonder, why are we talking about this war in Ukraine? It's happening 3,000 miles away. However, we are in a globally connected world. and the impacts of that war directly affect Kenya. First and foremost, due to the largely negative global supply shocks on two fronts, the supply of oil and the supply of grain, and also of fertilizer. Now, the latest available numbers indicate that the wheat importation figures stood at about 11 to 12 billion and about 5 billion Kenya shillings, respectively, from Russia and Ukraine. In other words, we spend $11 billion importing wheat from Russia and 5 billion importing wheat from Ukraine. So what does this mean? There's a conflict, and this is going to put a strain on the supply chain, rendering the price of wheat taking an upward trend. And we all know how important bread is. Bread is vital for Kenyan households, and we can't even start, dealing with that pressure again. Now, who is manufacturing bread in this country? We are talking about SMEs and MSMEs. So we are continuing to deal with many things. So we are recovering from COVID on one end. We have the Ukraine war, and there's also a fuel crisis, which has triggered, again, prices upwards as we look at it. Normally, I've had this common saying that when Kenya catches a cold, other countries catch pneumonia, because close to over 100 million people depend on Kenya for the supply of essential products or fuel items, including oil. So this conversation becomes even more important because sustaining small enterprises is vital for the Kenyan economy. And just the other day, I think in February, Treasury dropped plans to inject 1 billion shillings to de-risk access to credit for MSMEs under the economic stimulus program. So we need to caution our businesses. There is economic fallout arising from the coronavirus, from the Ukraine war, and from many other issues that are happening. So how do we cushion MSMEs? We need a legal framework. We need to have policies that are supportive of MSMEs. We need more accountability, and we need clarity and direction over this matter. We all know that private sector are pivotal actors in these efforts, and we also know that MSMEs continue to remain, they're so unprepared. We also have ad hoc ways of dealing with things, which is why we need a structured approach and we need legal frameworks. So thank you, Muthoni. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Wangashi. Indeed, it brings home the discussion about the actual disruption and how we are all intertwined in our different processes and why it is important to apply that risk lens. We now have Dr. Jock back. So back to you, Dr. Jock. Welcome.
Thank you very much for getting me back on, and also for the team for helping me figure out what our situation is. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here and to share with you, as I was saying earlier, some of what the reality of disaster management is. But I want to give a quick background that I normally discuss about disasters, so that we are situated in understanding what disasters are. What are we talking about when we refer to disasters? Excuse me. And the first thing I'd like for you to imagine and to place yourself in is in a place where you understand that disasters are not new. Disasters are not new. If we think for a moment about our ancestors, wherever it is that they were, right? They came together. They came together in groups, in communities, and wherever they lived, as hunters, as gatherers, whether they lived in a cave, part of what they were doing in coming together as a group and living in protective shelters was actually as a result of wanting to exist in a safe place, wanting to take the benefit of and reap the benefits of operating as a team against whatever it is the threats were. And those threats that they had assessed at that time included everything from the elements, the natural elements, also included animals, and possibly other groups as well, other individual groups of humans of other places. So from a historical perspective, we see that the thinking and the processes and the strategies to build resilience are really not new. The language might sound new, and in a few years the language might change, but the depth and the concept of it is really not new. I also really like to tie in the concept of faith, right? Bringing in both the Christian faith and the Islamic faith, and I do honor all our Islamic brothers and sisters who are fasting. I would like to take you back to a story in the Bible and also in the Quran about Noah. And typically in my field of disaster management, we refer to Noah as one of the very early emergency managers. Why? Because in both the Quran and in the Bible, we see the story told of an individual who received information from a reliable source, which is very important. At the time, that was the deity, God. He received information. The information that he received was complete in that it had directions on what was coming in the future. It had directions on what needed to happen in the present to prepare for what was coming, right? And he had information very specific on what to do, how to do it, and when he should do it, okay? Now, that is the role of an emergency manager. That is the role of a disaster manager, is that you're able to perceive the future, understand the present, and use history to inform your planning, your thinking, and the people that you bring around with you to prepare for the incoming challenges and the current ones as well. We also like to really apply the thought process of Noah in helping people understand that this message, the message of disaster management, emergency management, is one that is oftentimes not received with open arms, okay? So when you look in that scenario, you see that although Noah had information from a reliable source, the reception of that information, he was not received with, a lot of applause. Rather, there was a lot of, pushing back. So why do I bring that in? I bring that in to say that in the world today, based on the multiple disciplines and researchers and practitioners and policymakers, it is not for a lack of reliable information that we find ourselves in the positions that we are in. And this includes legal frameworks, the ways in which we operate as individuals, organizations, and communities in the nation at large, and even internationally. It is not because of a lack of information that the link is broken when it comes to trying to understand and implement and enforce, some of these legal frameworks. Mainly because, to be honest, they are often not popular. And why are they not popular? It's because it seems that what it is that they are predicting sounds too far-fetched, that what are the possibilities that this would happen? And then it sounds so removed, right? But even more importantly, when you have people who are living, paycheck to paycheck, month to month, or week to week, right? Whatever it is, the resources that they have on hand, to now take a portion of that to invest in this message that has been brought to them about what the impending future might be is extremely difficult. Yet we all know that even when we look at our indigenous ways of living, right, there was always the granary. So when you think about the granary concept, it's putting aside a little, in the process of strategizing for disasters, which are a guarantee, like I said, okay? It's also imperative that we understand that a failure to do that, a failure to invest and put away in that granary, whether it's at an individual level, at your business level as an MSME, what happens, and my colleague Wangashi also referred to this, is that when a pandemic like this one strikes, put together with Ukraine, put together with the locusts, the flooding, the drought, all these compounding effects really set your business, really set your family way back, significantly back. So we understand that message, but the implementation is where the challenge is. We really need to understand that disasters pre-existed us, they will be with us, and they will continue to be with us. But they will obviously, like I said, continue to be compounded. Now, I would like for us to understand what the creation of disasters means. The first thing that I would like for us to consider, and actually, if possible, remove from our vocabulary and thinking process, is that, oh, it's a natural disaster. It's God's will for the flooding, right? Faith-based approaches of just, saying, oh, that was supposed to happen. Why do I challenge that thought? I challenge that thought because when there is that thought, what follows typically is apathy. Is a throwing up of hands and saying, well, there's nothing much we could do. That is a natural phenomenon. Okay, so I do not question that sometimes it rains and rains a lot, that sometimes there's going to be earthquakes, right? What I really question and call for us to consider is that even with these realities, there is agency, there is advocacy, there are legal frameworks, macro level, but there's also the individual responsibility. So my question to you becomes then, what is it that you are doing in the creation of disasters? We need to understand our role, because if you think, for example, of a three-legged stool, right, there, if one is offside or lopsided, then you have a tilted stool that is not very functional. Now, we certainly consider the natural environment, the rain, the earthquake, as part of that three-legged stool. But there's also the human environment, which is you, your business, and the larger frameworks that exist, including the legal frameworks. There is also the built environment, and I like when I refer to the built environment, I want you to imagine in your mind the buildings that we have seen in Kenya leaning in one direction and eventually collapsing, or some of the buildings that have pancaked, taking lives, taking away resources, right, and causing long-term damage. My question is to you, is that a disaster? Was that bound to happen? Was that God's will? The question can be addressed within frameworks. For example, legal frameworks. What are the legal specifications? Again, reliable information that were ignored, that were wished away, that because of corruption or other reasons were put aside? What is the engineering knowledge that was absolutely thrown to the wind when it came to the mixing of the concrete? So what is the role of the individual? When you drop a piece of plastic paper on the ground, for example, in our cities, and that contributes to the blockage of the sewage, of the drainage system, so that when the rains come, collectively, all this causes flooding. That is the kind of thinking that I would like for us to understand, is that yes, disasters do happen, right? But there is no such thing as a natural disaster, because we have ways in which we have contributed, micro level and macro level, to the creation, right, and perpetuation of disasters. What is our interface? When we learned about slash and burn practices, how are we contributing to climate change extreme events? We really have got to think about that. I would like to quickly address, some of the ways in which, and I had some beautiful pictures, which like I said, I'd be happy to share with you. It's something that recently happened in South Africa. We had the flooding of 2022, just this year. Terrible flooding in which at least 500 people could have lost their lives. That is immediate evidence, right? But there is the long-term impact that we will continue to see, right? Even when the televisions have left, we will continue to see long-term impacts, and Wangashi did a really good job of discussing some of those within the larger setting, right? But here is what I would like to paint for you a picture of, is that even within that KwaZulu-Natal flooding, actually the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been charged with culpable homicide, right, for this flooding. Him and the government have been charged for culpable homicide. Why? Because they ignored reliable information and they have been held responsible. And that is the thing that I am talking about when we talk about the creation of disaster and the value of having legal frameworks. They will protect the most vulnerable of our people, right? And they will also give you as a business person protections, right, that you can apply to ensure that you, your family, and the businesses continue. Kenya recently passed a law criminalizing indigenous seed sharing. Essentially, what that means, right, in the Seeds and Plant Varieties Act, is that a Kenyan farmer anywhere, can actually be brought to bear the force of the law for sharing and exchanging, indigenous seeds. Now, what does that have to do with disasters? How does that link us back to disasters? What it means is that these farmers who have been exchanging crops, right, have been doing that, have been doing that maybe because they cannot afford to purchase seeds that, as they are required to do. Think about the vulnerability of that farmer when they cannot share those seeds, cannot have crops that they need to sustain themselves. And that has direct and indirect impacts on their livelihoods and that of their families as well. So when we make legal frameworks so detached and so fragmented from the reality of Kenyans and people's living, then we contribute in the creation of disasters. I would like to stop there and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. And if I may request you, if we have some more time after the participants forum, we will come back to you with some questions because we could go on, and that is so important for our interactive discussion today. Thank you very much, Wangashi. Thank you, Dr. Njoki. You have really set the stage for the next segment of our webinar. And I'm very pleased to introduce our two speakers, Dr. Elizabeth Mukoira and Dr. Choya. Dr. Elizabeth Mukoira, is a lecturer at the Strathmore Business School, and Dr. Choya is a strategist, foresight, and human development specialist, author, and consultant. And for the participants, you do realize that we are just quickly scanning through the bios of all our speakers today. If you are interested in receiving that, along with the slides from Dr. Njoki, please feel free to mention so using the chat forum. I will start then the third part of our discussion this afternoon with Dr. Elizabeth Mukoira. Dr. Mukoira, academia supports the interface between policy and science for decision making. In what ways can institutions like the Strathmore Business School serve to ensure that the interface is preserved in Kenya? Over to you, Dr. Mukoira. Okay, so while we try and get that going, I will jump to our next speaker, Dr. Choya. Dr. Choya, it would have been most appropriate to have your presentation after Dr. Mukoira speaks, but we are going to all manage our time properly. As I was saying, we would have loved to listen to Dr. Choya at the end of the webinar, at the end of the speakers forum, because she brings in a futuristic approach to this discussion. However, in order to best manage our time, I will kindly request Dr. Choya to move forward then with the discussion of today. Dr. Choya, leadership is key in disaster management. what is the appropriate leader culture in disaster legal frameworks? Over to you, Dr. Choya.
So yeah, okay, thank you so much. And let me just go. Of course, definitely it's true. I would have loved to listen to my colleague Dr. first. But let me just proceed and first say that one, I'm grateful to participate on this session. But the second one is to say that I want to build on what Wangashi and Jock have said. I think they have looked at the legal perspective as a solution in always coming to do two things: to protect, but also to enforce. And I'll wrap around there as I talk about the leader. It's to ask myself. I thought first of asking myself, why leadership culture in disaster legal framework? And I want to mention a few things. So of course, there is a growing demand for change from valued pressures due to the growing. When we say VUCA, I'm sure most of you know what VUCA stands for. Is a vulnerable, unpredictable, complex, and the big was environment that we are living in, which is increasingly becoming really complex. And the emphasis in dealing with this pressure for change is now different. There's demand to create, to guide, to direct, and manage change. It's no longer just this haphazard way of doing things. But always, when there is demand for change, sometimes there's resistance and challenging change. And some of the strategies that therefore attend to or are enforced many times when change is like this one you're talking about, the demand for change. It could be violence. A change comes when we use violence, or it could be non-violence. It could be organized ways of bringing about change. And law, of course, in this case, comes in. And the leadership is another one: technology, politics, and so forth. And so in this case, there are two of interest to me: the law that enforces and protects in this case, but also the leadership. So when I talk of the leadership culture, I will touch on leadership in that case, but I'll deal with the leader. I just thought of first ushering you into this understanding that culture is diverse. There are different types of cultures. There are regional cultures. That's why they say African culture, although Africa has very many cultures. There are national cultures. Kenya itself has a particular culture. One time I had the privilege of working outside my country, and every time we spoke, we were based in Jock, and every time we had all these groups we spoke, these guys used to say, these Kenyans, because there are certain things we spoke. One of the ways, as we will see, is culture is found in language. So every time we spoke Swahili. So that was a national culture. There's a sectoral culture like technology, there's institutional culture, there's community culture or tribal culture. There are group cultures, like the way we say youth cultures. But I'll single out this case to talk about the leader culture, and I'll get a little bit deeper. I will come into why leader, but let me just usher you into this understanding so that we are reading from the same script. So now, in that case, there are levels of culture. And when we talk of levels of a leader's culture, we talk of what you call artifacts. And artifacts are things that we see, they're visible and they're feelable. They're structures, when we talk of, for example, in this case, when we talk of legal framework, the document itself, the policy, would be considered an artifact. It's feelable, it can be seen. Languages are also, the terms we use in those documents that we use, the definition of the term disasters. These are things that we feel, we touch, we can see. But then there's what you call espoused leaders also. They don't just deal with artifacts, they deal with espoused beliefs and systems. And these ones are the ones that really shape change, because I'll put it to you that leaders are possibly the greatest level of influence, or one single influencing factor in any change. So when you talk about espousing beliefs and values, espousing beliefs and values, you're talking about the ideals, the goals, the values that leaders, aspire. I was listening to Dr. Jock speak, and you can almost feel the passion she has as a leader to address disaster issues. So that's her belief system. Those are values that she espouses, ideologies. For example, if we address disaster, will it help us? Will it change the community's perspective? Do we believe communities, for example, have a role to play? Do we believe MSMEs have a role to play? And then there are the toughest, which we don't see, but they are very influential. The underlying assumptions, and these are unconscious takeoffs or take for granted belief values. For example, what Dr. Jock just alluded to, that when disasters come, we believe really it's not us, it's God. That's a serious belief, because then the belief systems inform our response. So I just wanted to let you know that when we talk about culture, a leader's culture, we are talking of these three levels. There's what we quickly see, there's what we believe and value, but there's what is deep-seated, underlying things that our assumptions, and they do influence our actions as leaders. So what in that case, when we talk about a leader's culture, what are we talking about? Leader's culture in this case, it entails the leader's values, beliefs, traditions, behaviors, decisions, and motives. It is also it's a way a leader does things, interacts with people, makes decisions, and behaves, and also influences others. We're also talking about the leader's culture shaping the organization's culture. Actually, it's one single factor that shapes the organization's culture, because there are four types of cultures that drive an organization, and I will not go into that. But the type of leader that we have in the realm, especially top-notch leader in an organization, does shape the culture that drives the organization. And as you know, they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning if you have the wrong culture in an organization, it doesn't matter how good the strategy is. And I thought of this well-known guy, Branson. And he said there's no magic formula for great company culture. The key is just to treat your staff how you would like to be treated. In other words, if you look at this quote from Branson, what he's trying to say is it is from the leader behavior that you see the organizational culture. So you can be able to link in the behavior of the leaders and what we see out there virtually in every aspect of life. So how do leaders influence or shape cultures? Because the aspect of addressing disaster in itself, the how we do it, the consistency, the approach to doing it is actually a culture in itself. Culture is the way of doing things. So how do leaders then influence? They do so by the strategy or the vision. That when a leader sets a vision, the emphasis, the vision is what you focus on, what you give priority to. Leaders also influence cultures by prioritizing, as I say. They do so by the type of human resource they hire or develop. They also do that by what is consistent, what they consistently communicate. If you are in an organization, for example, or in a government, let's say a president, and the president consistently communicates the importance of taking or addressing vulnerability. That's the way the nation will look at it. It is what you consistently communicate as a leader. And then it is also what the leader resources. That's how leadership cultures. I'm looking at the different ways in which a leader shapes the culture of an institution or a nation or even a region. What leaders resource, what they give priority to, what they fund, what they give attention to is important. I was looking at the current disaster act for Kenya and the role of the National Disaster Authority. And what some of the things that I see there about resourcing, the government resourcing, the national and the county authorities. So it is what the leaders resource. It is also what the leaders reward. That's our leadership culture. So if leaders in different places, for example, in a small, medium size, SME, organizations or micro enterprise, if they resource acts of good management of disasters, then that's what the employees will do. It's what we resource. It's what we reward as leaders that the followers tend to pick. And then, of course, leaders shape cultures of institutions and nations by what they model. And look at, for example, Rwanda. See what's happening with the president. The cleaning days and making sure that the necessary plans and architectural standards and transport protocols and behaviors are observed, that's what the leader models. If the leaders model what they want to see, the people will do. And I, like earlier we said, one of the things that has made it very difficult to effectively manage disasters in our context, even in Africa, and I mean not just Kenya, but in Africa, it is what we model as leaders. If we say one thing but do another, those that follow us will not do that. So I just wanted to look at some of the ways in which we can influence as leaders. It doesn't matter even if we have a legal framework. If the leader does not do these things, it's going to be difficult. If we have a good act, we don't prioritize it. We don't hire professional people. We do not consistently communicate. We do not provide the necessary resources. We do not reward when people adhere and uphold to those standards. And we don't even model. It's just going to be another paper in the archive. So then what kind of leaders or leader culture do we want in disaster legal framework? There are many types, but I just picked 4 areas. One, we need visionary and pragmatic leaders. It's not going to go anywhere unless we have people who see beyond today. And this is where I'm very passionate about people that are able to see beyond tomorrow. Naturally, especially in African culture, we fear interacting with the unknown. But we need, leaders who are visionary about this. And I tie that with what I'm calling number 2, the tri-side lens. These are leaders who are able to look back, look today and look tomorrow. That's what you call the hindsight, the inside. The hindsight is the past, is what happens yesterday. And that's not bad. It's to reflect on that information. But also ask what is happening today, because we cannot walk backwards to the tomorrow. We look back, but we walk forward, and that's where foresight comes in. And then the issue of global mindset. Now, global mindset in this case is, when we talk about a global mindset culture, we are talking of a culture where people think beyond their context. And how the problems are happening in a particular context impact just beyond that environment, or even a locality. For example, we may think in terms of a county. For us to understand our context in Kenya, we look at a county and say, if this issue is affecting this county, does it have the potential to impact another county? And in that case, how do we tackle this problem? So a global mindset is not, it's yes global, but it's bigger mind. It's a mind that goes beyond your locality, and thinks on how to bring in different networks and bring them together and push them to a point of addressing issues that really touch the particular context that we are working in. When we talk of global mindset or culture, we are talking of, these are generally leaders who have this mindset or culture. They understand the cultural, the social, the political differences that keep contributors apart. And they also look at the way in which they can take advantage of that and instead build and cultivate and connect, the different players in that context, so that they can be able to address the issue at hand beyond the current situation. And then number 4 is, I think this kind of leaders need to cultivate a global entrepreneurship culture. And again, when we talk of an entrepreneurship culture here, again, I have used this word global deliberately, is to say that it's to say truly global, but is to say, think beyond where you are, think beyond your locality, think beyond your organization. Sometimes I see industries just, releasing, stuff that's or affluent into the river. and they don't think about how it's going to affect the community. So a global entrepreneur will not do that because they are thinking beyond their company. This is the culture that applies resources and assumes risks in creating new value, with expectations of receiving benefits. And such benefits are not necessarily monetary, but they could be benefits that will change the nation. And finally, I think this kind of leaders needs to be leaders who cultivate a culture of agility. They are flexible. They don't just think in terms of themselves. We don't just look at the legal. I mean, these are people who say the issues of disaster management are beyond, the guys working in the field, or the social workers, or the disaster management specialists like me and possibly Jockey, and rise above and bring leadership, like I'm bringing another angle, and bring legal another angle. We are agile. We are able to embrace. Somebody said a partnership is today's currency of exchange. So I feel like these are some of just a few things that I feel that the kind of leaders who will bring forth, benefits and help us move forward in sustainably addressing issues of disaster management from the two perspectives of both protecting and enforcing in the legal aspects. Must be people who are diverse. They are visionary. They wear tri-side lens. They have a global mindset. They bring connections, around, and partners and people, different players, and they mobilize resources. They are altruistic. They are selfless. They release resources for the benefit of the bigger community. And then they also are agile. They are flexible. So basically, that's what I thought I could say. And I want to conclude my presentation by this statement that Mandela one time said. He said, when a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace. I believe I have made that effort, and that is it. Therefore, why I will sleep for eternity. I had the privilege of living in South Africa when Mandela was alive. And I must say that as Africans, we have a real example in there of an altruistic leader, selfless person. And those are the kinds of leaders that we are calling. They're not just visionary. They have a global mindset. They are not thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about their own troubles. They're thinking about a nation. They're thinking about the community. They're thinking about, the region. They're thinking about the global community. So that's what I had, and thank you so much for that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Choya. I was just saying when you left for a few seconds that this so well plugs into what we started out very early in the program, where we said ours is a call to advocate, and when you advocate, you're really looking for change. So listening to your presentation about the leaders' culture and how it actually ties in to disaster management and that tri-site lens to legal frameworks, to DRM, it just shows that we are definitely well aligned and moving on forward with our program. Thank you so much, Dr. Choya. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have Dr. Mukaira back, but before I bring her on, I just want to convey the apologies from our third speaker, Ms. Mutheu Kimilu, who was not able to join us today because she had a medical emergency. So we will then be working with our host, Invest in Africa Kenya, to see how we can still get to bring Ms. Kimilu on board for her to share her insights in an Ask an Expert session to be communicated later. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Elizabeth Mukaira. Daktari, over to you. Okay. Our ICT system today is having some risks. So what I suggest we do is we are actually going to go back very briefly to Dr. Njoki for maximum 10 minutes. because she has managed to resolve her challenges with her presentation. And Dr. Jocky, we still want to listen to you. So let me give you the floor for 10 minutes. Well, now we get Dr. Mokera back online. Over to you, Dr. Jocky, for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. And so I think what I would like to certainly address with us here today is that we have really considered multiple, looking at disasters, like I defined what disasters are, right? Meaning disasters are essentially events that occur that are created through three different ideas. Or remember what I said about the three-legged stool, that there's the natural environment, which we do not necessarily have very much control about, right? And in some instances, we do. And some of the instances include, for example, if we reroute a river, right, so that we can either collect the water or make it pass some areas that we want it to pass, then yes, it's a naturally occurring phenomena, but we as individuals have played a role in redirecting it. So, when I say natural phenomena, I mean, areas where we really do not necessarily have full control. It could be the rain, it could be the quick onset disasters like earthquakes, for example. But then there's also the second part, which is the human environment, ways in which we as individuals and also collectively, I like what my colleague was talking about, the global perspective, how that global community, whether it's your ancestral home, whether it's your business, because that too is an enterprise in and of itself. How do you think about disasters? What's your leadership culture, right? What are your expectations? Are you always waiting on somebody else to come and resolve the challenges that you might have, yet you have a role? So again, the way you think is the way in which you will tend to act. Okay, so that is the human component, that decision making. And then there's the built environment. How do we build? Where do we build, right? So for example, if you know that you're living in an area where the earthquake activity is very high, the way you build is very important, right? There are communities that have actually been able to coexist with earthquake movement, right? Yet there are some that have totally ignored the reality that they live in an area that is very high in earthquakes, and therefore the way they build and their constructions, etc., you have tremendous damage that happens, right? And so when we think about those realities, the three realities, we have to understand the role that, yes, personal decision plays, but also the legal frameworks. Now, the piece that I am sharing with you here touches on the legal frameworks, answers the question is, if we want to progress away from these hazards here that exist, the dangers, the disease, the events that happen, if we want to move in the opposite direction rather than towards these disasters, what are the ways in which legal frameworks can be applied towards the progression of safety? Okay, so the first, and I don't know whether you can see my arrow pointing here, the first is that we really need to address root causes. We also need to address the pressures and we also need to achieve safe conditions. This is a model that was created by Dr. Wisner. And in this conversation, when we apply legal frameworks, for example, in addressing root causes, what we do is that we challenge the ideologies of political systems, economic systems, where they increase vulnerability. We challenge them, right? And when we challenge them using different platforms, including legal platforms, then if we can challenge that thinking, like I made the reference of how Cyril Ramaphosa, now the president of South Africa, right, is going to have to answer to why it is that the South African government did not do everything possible, not to stop the rain, right, not to stop the rain, but to apply mitigation and preparedness strategies to limiting the loss of life, injuries, loss of infrastructure, right? And loss of, all the collective losses that South Africans will continue to experience even after they have buried the people that they lost, and even after the ones who have been injured have actually recovered, because this is going to take tens of years. We in America, for example, are still recovering from Hurricane Katrina, right? And Hurricane Katrina, I would like to share with you, was not a disaster necessarily caused by the actual hurricane. It was a failure of the levees, right? When they broke, because they could not withstand the pressures of the water. When they broke, that then the flooding created significant damage. So these are not foreign concepts. We see applying legal frameworks, we see that people can be held accountable, right? Governments can be held accountable. Individuals can be held accountable. Landlords can be held accountable when they put together constructions that are not going to protect people's lives, right? So challenging ideology, political systems. Wangashi very aptly said, we are in an election year. So some of the questions we might be looking to ask our leaders that we want to elect is, what is the thinking? Is it global thinking? Is it global thinking, like Dr. Choya said, okay? In the process of moving towards a progression of safety, as opposed to a progression of vulnerability that pushes us harder, quicker towards disaster, we also need to address the pressures. What are some of the pressures? It's the development of local institutions, education, training, skills, local investment, markets, the freedom of the press, ethical standards in public life. Those are some of them. Macro levels, population health, managing urbanization, right? Adapting industry development with purpose, rescheduling loan payments, reforestation. And I honor Wangari Maathai and that movement at this moment, right? So all those things collectively will work towards moving us to safety. Now, part of the challenge that we have is that we deal with these things in isolation. We do not see the connectivity and the global perspective that these play in sheltering and protecting us from disasters. And finally, in the progression of safety, we really need to consider the environment, protecting the environment and building resilience within the economy and public actions. So for example, personally, what are the disaster preparedness realities that you live with? What are your challenges that you live with? Wherever it is that you live, wherever it is that you work, right? If you participate, for example, in a community of faith, and you worship there every Friday or every Sunday or whatever day that you go, that is a collection of a big group of people. Do you know, are you aware of where the exits are in case something happened and you needed to exit, right? Do you know what your church, what your mosque, or wherever it is you shop, what are the possibilities that if, for example, a fire started, right, you would be able to exit the shopping supermarket? We remember the very tragic fire that happened, and because of our of the way we do burglar proofing and security, it has gone to the point where it actually jeopardizes people's lives. So thinking through how we built environment, thinking through our public actions and how those individual and collective actions either predispose us to disasters or move us closer towards disasters is what this model towards safety is really calling us to do. And it is a model which, if you look at every step of the way, really needs to be addressed using a legal framework. And I will pause there for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. I am going to see if we have managed to get to establish connection with Dr. Mokera. Okay, so we hear you loud and clear. We will let you run with it. Please, Karibu, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Let me share my screen now. So my name is Elizabeth Mokeira. I know that last name gives people problems in terms of pronouncing it. It's Mokeira. So to the participants, it is Mokeira if you have problems, or I'm happy to be called Elizabeth because that forms part of my name. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I had in mind the legal framework for disaster risk management in the country. And the latest we have in the entrance in our legal framework is the bill, the 2021 bill. And therefore, my presentation is going to focus on that bill and talk about the opportunities, the challenges, and the strategies that the bill is presenting to us, and the role that the academia can actually play in disaster risk management in the country. So the context is Kenya, and I'm working from the assumption that we understand disaster in Kenya and how the history of these disasters. But of course, as someone from the academia, we have to define stuff. Went wrong, and I have to go back to the meeting. I don't know what happened.
Dr. Mokeira, we hear you.
My screen has disappeared. I don't know why I can't share.
But we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So then what is a disaster? What is a disaster? Of course, when we talk about disasters, we may actually think about an event that occurs that actually disrupts the functioning of a society. Materially, economically, it actually disrupts the livelihood of everyone. And that actually is beyond the scope of the resources of that particular community. So that we say a disaster has actually befallen that particular community because we have to cope with the event that has occurred because it has affected our material, economic, and social livelihoods. So as Dr. Njoki mentioned earlier on in her presentation, we have key phases of disaster risk management cycle. We have the prevention phase where we try and make sure that if a disaster happens, actually we mitigate the effect of that disaster.
Dr. We are having connectivity
challenges. How do we recover this? And so when I'll be talking about
Dr. May I suggest that we stop sharing the slide to see if we can get clarity in your presentation, because you're coming in broken and we are not really getting the benefit of this rich and vast presentation that you're sharing. Awesome, great.
Much better now.
Yes, Dr. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So when I was preparing this presentation, as I was alluding to, I wanted to talk about the 4 phases and what role the academia actually plays in disaster risk management in the country. But before that, of course, we're talking about the legal and regulatory framework for disaster risk management in Kenya. And it is important for me to lay that legal framework, if any, that is, so that we see where the opportunities are and what are, so that we see what role the academia can actually play in mitigating or even filling the weaknesses that I'm going to present. So we'll start with the Constitution of Kenya being the ground norm of the land. So the Constitution, of course, when you look at Article 42, it will guarantee every Kenyan a right to a clean and healthy environment. And that means that we have a right to the environment that is protected for the benefit of the present and the future generations. Article 43 will also guarantee economic and social rights. This includes the right to access adequate housing, the right to reasonable standards of sanitation, the right to free from hunger, among others. When disasters actually strike, or when a disaster is threatening to strike, those 2 rights that are guaranteed under Article 42 and Article 43 are the most affected. And since we are talking about MSMEs, then we can see how they will be greatly affected by disasters. So besides the Constitution, we have the Kenya National Disaster Operations Center, which was established in 1998. And this actually happened in response to El Nino rains. Those of us who are old enough, we realized that in 1998, we faced one of the craziest rains we have ever experienced in the country. And therefore, the National Disaster Operations Center was established to coordinate disaster management and response operations in Kenya. Please underline the word there is response. So we are responding to, we are not prepared, we are not preventing, we are just responding to disaster operations in Kenya. Then in 2013, through a presidential directive, we established the National Disaster Management Unit. And of course, one good thing about this unit is that together with other stakeholders, the unit has formulated the National Emergency Plan and the Standard Operation Procedures, which were signed in 2014 to actually provide for a clear leadership, command, control, and coordinated approach to disaster mitigation, prevention, preparedness, and also recovery in the country. Now, besides that, we also have the National Policy for Disaster Management in Kenya, 2009, which provides a basis for the institutional and the legal framework for disaster management in Kenya. Now, it is on the basis of this policy that the current bill, that is the Disaster Risk Management Bill of 2021, was drafted. And for purposes of this presentation, as I said, I'll focus on this Disaster Risk Management Bill and show the opportunities it presents, as well as the weaknesses inherent in it, so that we see how we can work to make sure that the weaknesses in that bill, especially from the academic point of view, have actually been dealt with, so that when the bill finally comes to be a law, because we're praying and hoping that it will be enacted, then it provides an effective legal framework for disaster management and risk prevention in this country. So what are the opportunities that the bill presents? Now, when you look at it, and I'm hoping that as participants, we have actually gone through the bill, so I'm working from that perspective, that when you look at the bill, especially the preamble, it is an act of parliament to provide a legal framework for coordination of disaster risk management activities and for any connected purpose. And therefore, this bill, from the academic point, we have always argued through research that there is no legal framework in the country. And therefore, this bill, once it becomes a law, it will provide the much needed, the much envisaged legal framework for disaster prevention and preparedness, as well as recovery in Kenya. Number two, for the very first time, the bill has defined what a disaster is, because every time there's a hazard, there's a risk, there's an emergency, we think everything is a disaster. So what is a disaster? And then it has provided for the classification of disasters to include county disasters and the national disasters. I'll be coming back to those definitions and those classifications on the weaknesses of the bill. Number three, another opportunity the bill has provided is that it has established the National Disaster Management Authority, which serves as the national agency when it comes to the implementation of disaster risk management activities and operations in the country. Remember, we've only had the KNOPC and also the Disaster Management Unit, which we talked about. Now, we have a National Disaster Management Authority, which is given the functions and the powers to actually deal with implementing disaster risk management operations and activities in this country. It's a very good thing that the bill is presenting. Now, since we have devolution and the devolved governments at the county level, the bill also establishes the committee which was set in the county level. And therefore, because we know that these disasters affect a particular county before they become a national disaster, that is actually a good thing that the bill has actually done. And finally, we have a fund. The bill has established what we call the Disaster Risk Management Fund to provide funds to be used for the disaster risk management operations and activities. Or you realize that when a disaster happens, we normally wait for the goodwill of Kenyans, the goodwill of non-Kenyans, the goodwill of everyone involved, so that we can actually have funds to even respond and recover from these disasters. But for the very first time, there's a fund that has been put in place to actually provide funds that will be used in the event that a disaster strikes. Those are some of the opportunities that the bill has actually presented. But what are the weaknesses? Are there weaknesses that this bill has actually presented? Of course, yes. First of all, when you look at the membership of the board of authority, the national authority, there are key stakeholders that are actually missing. Key stakeholder that is missing is the civil society organizations. These and NGOs, if I may them as a group like that, these are the people involved in disaster risk of it. So if we don't have a representation from the civil society, then I think we have left out a key step. And then the function of the authority may lack the expertise of a very key stakeholder. Number two, the scientists, especially the ones who come from the environment and climate sector, if I may call it like that. The reason why I think, in my opinion, that the scientists from environment and climate should be included in the composition of the board is because the disasters we have in this country are meteorological in nature, although not all of them, but most of them are. And therefore, these scientists may actually have something they will have to input in the board of the authority as they discharge their mandate. And finally, of course, the academia. The academia has been left out for reasons that we don't know. Maybe we're not that proactive, but the academia is also missing from that representation. So it's my hope and my wish that as we go ahead to advocate for the changes to this bill, because we know the stage at which it is, we may actually advocate for the inclusion of those people. Number two, yes, we have established the authority and the county committees, but how do they link with each other? How do they collaborate? Do we have the national authority there and then the county committees there? How do we deal with each other? Collaborate in the event a disaster happens, or even when we are talking about prevention at any phase. So that collaboration or that coordination between the authority and the committee needs to be established, especially by this specific act of parliament, to make it more effective. Another key thing that is mentioned but not just mentioned as a by the way when I was reading the bill is that public awareness and education on disaster management. Education and public awareness creates or plays an important role at the prevention and even the mitigation phase. So if we just say that one of the functions of the authority is to create public awareness, how do we do that? And we also say that the same thing should happen at the county level. That framework of how they do it and how they relate with each other is not actually given, and therefore that one needs to be added. And I think finally, on the weaknesses, we look at the funding. Yes, we have a fund, and the board is the one that is controlling that fund. So let us imagine that the disaster that has happened is a county disaster. So how do we share funds from that fund between the national government and the county government? That one was left out, and therefore there could be a problem if the disaster question is a county disaster, not a national disaster, because for the national disaster, of course, the board will tap into the fund. But what about the county disaster? Because at the county level, we don't have a fund. So how do we share funds between the national and the county government from the fund that has already been established? So those are some of the weaknesses I was able to identify from the bill that I bring to the fore of the participants, and then I'll hear their views on how maybe we should deal with that one. So to the nitty-gritty, what role does the academia play in risk management, disaster risk management in this country? Of course, we know that higher education, where universities are located, play a very instrumental role in fostering growth, reducing poverty, and bolstering shared prosperity of our nation. So research has shown that when you have a highly skilled workforce with lifelong access to solid post-secondary education, they are actually innovative. They propel development, whether it is social, human, or even human development. Well-educated people will be more employable, they will be productive, they'll earn higher wages, and therefore the economic growth of our country will actually go higher. And the opposite is true. So these universities where I'm to focus on the universities. I know higher education has other institutions, but let me focus on the university. So universities will actually provide not only the high skills that are necessary for the labor market or human capital, but also training that is essential for the people who will contribute to the national human and social development. These are doctors, nurses, civil servants, engineers, entrepreneurs, scientists, and a myriad of other personnel that actually contribute to the development holistically of country. And these individuals have been trained by the universities who have the capacity and the analytical skills to actually drive the local economies and drive the country to a direction that we need it in terms of sustainable growth and development.
But I just want to pick up one very good aspect. There was many other aspects that Dr. Mukaira brought in about the opportunities and also the weaknesses of the bill. But I just want to give clarity for the participants that the bill that we are referring to, that we are advocating for that inclusivity in terms of multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, including academia, science, private sector, public sector, all inclusive, is Senate Bill number 14, which is under preparation. And this is the Senate Bill.
Am I audible?
Yeah, Daktari, just give me 1 minute and then I'll bring you back in. I just wanted to take advantage of you reconnecting to just inform our participants that the particular bill that we're referring to and that we need to influence and advocate for the multi-stakeholder, multi-agency, influence academia and science to contributing to the drafting of that bill is Senate Bill number 14. And this is a Senate Bill 2021 that has not yet gone through the second reading, I believe, and it's a special issue. So now over to you, Dr. Mukaira.
Thank you so much, and sorry for that. I was thrown out of the meeting because of internet. All right, so I was saying since disasters also affect the entire society, then universities can and actually do play a key role in disaster risk management. Remember, universities play 3 roles. They teach, they conduct research, and also we get involved in community service. So as an educational and research institution, universities actually can accomplish their role in disaster risk management, for example, by carrying out a program to identify and assess the physical characteristics of a likely disaster. They can formulate and implement strategies to reduce these disasters and also anticipate the disaster impact and plan response actions in light of those anticipated effects. And therefore, you can see that universities can be involved in all phases of a disaster cycle that I had earlier mentioned on. So universities can play a key role in public education and creation of awareness. For example, I am happy that my colleague, Dr. Jock, is here from the executive program of disaster risk management. So you can actually develop a comprehensive educational disaster program or curriculum for the community. And you can actually teach that program in a language that is simple, easy to understand. It is a high quality program and low cost so that people from the society, because disasters are going to strike the society, can actually easily access the information or the knowledge that comes from these programs. So the best disaster researchers I know are people with substantial experience in disaster response and planning. And most of these people, we find them in the academia. They could not be like lecturers like myself, but they are involved in programs, in institutions that have been established by the academia to actually bring that knowledge out. So when we conduct research in disaster risk management in an attempt to determine the truth about the disasters themselves, the likelihood of them repeating, the impact they may have, we actually get involved in all the phases of disaster risk management. So without such efforts, the application of the resources we get, we will always be making mistakes and we will be repeating these mistakes. And therefore, my argument is that universities, especially people who are involved in research and training, can actually make a very good contribution in disaster risk management. So in conclusion, because of time, the role of the university in disaster management include things like disaster education, relief, because we are involved in community service, we belong to a society, and therefore when a disaster strikes, we don't fold our arms. We go out there as community volunteers, and we also support the affected community because we are also affected as an institution. COVID-19 taught us that when a disaster strikes, we are not left behind. Our schools were shut, our universities were shut, we were at home and all those other things. So we are also affected. And therefore, when we conduct research and engage in these other things, we actually make a great contribution or a significant contribution to disaster management and prevention in this country. So therefore, my parting shot is that cooperation and the collaboration of the academia, private business companies, industries, with the governments, with the civil societies, with NGOs, and all other stakeholders is actually very fundamental in building communities that, one, prevent disasters, prepare for those disasters if they strike, respond to those disasters in a way that actually lessens the negative effects that they may have in a community, and also enable the community to recover from disasters at a faster pace so that they can go back to their normal livelihoods. I hand over back to you, the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mukera. This has really been, it's insightful. It speaks to discussions that have taken place the whole of this afternoon. You do realize that we did not come back to the participants forum for the simple reason that we have not received any questions yet, and it is good because then we keep the discussion going. It is indeed learning, it's indeed sharing, all very important for legal frameworks as incubators for disaster management. I would like to hand over very briefly 3 minutes to Dr. Njoki. Over to you, Dr. Njoki, before we come then to the closing segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What an informative and very enlightening conversation from Dr. Mukeria. Thank you very much. Dr. Mukeria addressed quite some few components with regard to what it is we can actually do and the value of the legal frameworks, and gave us a really a systematic review at what the country has done. In the broader perspective, what I would like to say is that we have neighboring African countries that actually have on paper already passed as law bills that are actually in the process of being enforced and reenacted. So as a leading African country, we really owe it to ourselves as citizens of this country to really encourage and demand of our politicians and of our policy holders to respond and to actually forward these pieces of legislation. One of our attendees here today is Miss Juliet Akinyi. Juliet Akinyi, thank you very much for the story that you briefly told us about the fire that you experienced at Toy Market and how it is that affected your business, one, but also your livelihoods. These are the things that we are talking about. This is what Dr. Mukeria is asking about. Funds. If we had these legal frameworks in place already, Juliet should have been able to access an element of funding from her county level, thanks to devolution, right? To be able to help her get back to her feet, right? So that she is able to continue to feed her family, educate her children. Juliet also, knowing that she has the frameworks to support her, right, would have had a place to go to learn more about what she can do. And she has been very specific, saying that she has learned a lot about disaster management in this session. So Juliet would have known that while Dr. Mukeria addressed higher education, Juliet would also have known something that we have learned from people like Mr. Odua, who works with the Kenyan government, and also independent organizations like IIA, who are hosting us today, that Juliet would have had access to training and understanding on how to prepare and mitigate for disasters, right? Whether it is structural preparation or non-structural preparation. By structural preparation, looking at her stall and understanding how can I build most effectively to limit fire. Non-structurally, is there any insurance of any kind, whether it's collective insurance that the fellow stall owners come together and bargain for a kind of insurance cover, non-structural mitigation, you know, because maybe she might not be able, I'm not assuming, I'm making the assumption, but maybe she would not have been able to assume the role of an entire individual cover, but collectively through individuals who are just brilliant in teaching us about insurance and the law, with that coming together, would have been able to support the work that Juliet has said. If I there's a bit of feedback. I don't know whether you're hearing me.
We hear you, Dr. Joki, but there's an echo from another, maybe your phone or something.
Okay, thank you. So I hope that I have painted for you. I hope that I have painted for you, given an example, and once again, thank you, Juliet, for sharing your example. I have shared with you, I hope I have painted for you what it is we're talking about and how it can apply to you. And there's more information from these wonderful presenters that can actually shed more light. So we encourage questions from the team. And finally, I would also like to say that some of the other missing components that we see in this bill is that it does not talk about how we can integrate education from elementary level, right, all the way to higher level, to vocational schools, polytechnics, what have you, how it is that we can integrate disasters. Because as was pointed out, disasters are local. They affect us at the fire affected Akinyi and her work. The collapse of the building in fact impacts that individual who lived there, but also impacts the landlord, the person that owns that building, and the responders. So we have a failure in this document as it stands to highlight that. We also see that in this bill as it stands right now, the focus is on one hazard, fire, which I don't understand why. Yet we understand that we have a very cross-sectional disaster profile. And it is important for us to understand that there's those disasters that we immediately see, and then there are also disasters which, unfortunately, our colleague could not make it, Mudeu Kimulu, who is an expert in cybersecurity, things that we sometimes don't think as contributing to disasters, but have created significant disasters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. I am just looking at the time. We've got 8 more minutes. I can see a comment and actually a question from Mulemi, who says, do we have any legal framework being worked on with our neighboring countries through the East African community? Remember, if a disaster is in, for example, Tanzania, it will affect Kenya. We need some sort of legal harmonization through the East African Community Parliament. And that's indeed a very, very valid comment. There is a specific question to Dr. Choya, which if she can just answer that in just a very few minutes, Dr. Choya. Jason is asking, which other countries can we emulate good leadership practice? I give you 2 minutes, Dr. Choya, for that. Thank you.
Okay. So when I studied disaster management at the University of Nairobi, I took time to study the US, FEMA, and Canada. And I know those contexts are rather different. I also studied South Africa, but I think the white paper there was the work is, the document in South Africa is well written, but the implementation for South Africa is a problem. So I think I would say so far the country that I think has made some level, especially looking at the structure which the current bill is being hinged on, it borrows strong from the FEMA one, which is the disaster management body in US. So I wouldn't say this 100%, but I would think both Australia and the US that are really heavily affected by disaster, the road is somewhere we can borrow. But again, as I said, considering that those contexts are also a little bit different from others, in the African setting, Document-wise, South Africa practice, I wouldn't say there's one, maybe Angola a little bit. Yeah, so I would say we still have just pockets. We can borrow, in Africa, we just have different pockets. The documents are good, but the practice, we borrow different aspects from different countries.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Choya.
May I say one more thing, just from what Wangashi said?
Yes, you have 1 minute, Dr. Choya.
Yes. I think we have a good conversation here, but we will not move the agenda unless we identify the entry point. And I want to say this, that the Strathmore University is a respected and pivotal university, and we may challenge the university to take lead in engaging leaders and strategic leaders for that matter, identifying the key people that influence action aid and the respected types of leaders. Other universities, they have departments, communities and bodies, World Vision, those agencies, and bring together leaders, particularly influence. I told you the 7 ways in which leaders influence disaster management, so that we can have this kind of conversation and begin to identify where are the gaps in the current bill. How can we meet it and make it stronger? How can we push the agenda forward? I am a strong advocate of communities, so those CSOs will tell us where are the strong community bodies that we can bring on board. We shouldn't leave those that are affected most. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Choya. Before I hand over back to David for the closing remarks, I just want to touch on 5 things, 4 being follow-up actions that we have committed to as part of this webinar. Slides from Dr. Jock are available for the persons who would want to have. Kindly let us know through the chat option. The bios as well from the speakers are available, and so is the presentation from Dr. Choya and from Dr. Mokera. Ladies and gentlemen, we started off with a voice of advocacy. We wanted to advocate very, very strongly for legal frameworks as incubators for disaster risk management. Dr. Choya, you have brought up the most important part as we close, which is getting an entry point to move this agenda forward. It behooves us as not only participants to this webinar, but as interested citizens of this great country to ensure that we get these opportunities and weaknesses for this Senate Bill number 14 of 2021, which is the draft risk management bill, that it is shaped, it is informed, and it is ratified in the right way, and that is actually going to address the issues of risk management to Kenya and her people. I thank you all very much. This has really, really been truly engaging. There is a lot of advocacy work that needs to go forward. We have all been participants here. We are all advocates. We are all champions. We need to make sure that these voices are heard in different forums and make sure that it gets to the right strategic leaders for it to come out as a bill that responds to the current and emerging challenges for disaster risk management. I now hand back to David Ajoy of Invest in Africa Kenya for the closing remarks. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Mudhoni, and good afternoon again. I'm very privileged to be moving this vote of thanks this afternoon, and especially after having such an insightful and really inspiring session. Thank you to our power speakers. On behalf of Invest in Africa, I want to thank you, and I want to begin by saying a big thank you to our speakers of the day. Your very insightful contributions on this legal framework and the connection between, micro SME disaster management have been very enlightening and revolutionary as well. I want to specifically, and with deep gratitude, thank our panelists and speakers of the day, Ms. Wangashi Muriki, Dr. Njoki Marumba. Thank you so much. Dr. Elizabeth Mukeria, Dr. Choya, and of course in absentia, Ms. Mudeu, who could not join us today. We really appreciate your presence and contributions to this topic of the day. We are very grateful for your invaluable insights and for offering solutions as well on how we can improve the legal frameworks in Kenya, especially with focus to disaster management. I can't forget to thank our moderator of the day. We are really indebted to you, Ms. Mudhoni Jogu, for quite moderating this session today, very exceptionally, and for your commitment as well. You are very consistent, especially in planning for this webinar, and your experience and passion are really invaluable. We really appreciate that. To our event partners, Invest in Africa, really also want to say immense thank you for collaborating with us and for partnering with us jointly to drive resilience and disaster management to our SMEs. We really appreciate our shared experiences and commitments and, the move towards building a culture of risk management and supporting micro SMEs. We've heard it from some of the participants, the challenges they faced, and working jointly together and bringing our efforts together leads back to recovering and building back better for these SMEs. We really thank you. Our gratitude goes specifically to the Strathmore Business School and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Thank you so much. All this session could not happen without you, our distinguished participants and SMEs. We are really grateful. We are honored that you could join us today in this webinar. And, you are the ones really walking the talk on MSME resilience. You are the ones that this disaster strike against, and you are the ones feeling the impacts. So we really thank you for being here today and contributing to this topic of the day. To everyone else, at this point, I hope I have not inadvertently left on anyone, but please may you all feel very appreciated. I know that it takes every one of us to have these important sessions and of course finding solutions to our businesses on a day-to-day basis. Each of you contributes invaluably and we thank you sincerely. Thank you so much. As we end this session, please don't forget to fill in a feedback form that will be shared with you by Frank Mwema from Invest in Africa. Watch out in the chat box, and thereafter, you may feel a pleasure to leave. The webinar today, I can say, will be officially closed, and I want to wish you all a very good evening and looking forward to seeing you again in our future sessions. Thank you so much and have the rest of the day. Thank you.